So this case study is the building of a 3-year plan to evolve a culture in a company which ran the maintenance of buildings in the public sector. Now this maintenance included the public sector housing, offices and halls, and employed at the time around 4,000 people. These included tradesmen, plumbers, electricians, all the trades, and many managerial staff and people running the central administration. The business operated from locations across the UK and competed for public sector contracts. So that is, it competed for the contract to run this service for a particular council for any number of years. The task was to evolve a culture where the service and the behaviour was consistent across the whole business. Now, working with them on a strategy to develop the desired culture, I leaned heavily on Richard Barrett's work, and I borrowed from Fred Koffmans as well, and used my own understanding of integral theory and spiral dynamics integral. The whole business was quite fragmented. As the business became more successful, it became more fragmented. Winning a new public sector contract could mean adding to the workforce as many as 500 or 600 employees overnight. These employees were employed by the public sector and were now coming into the private sector, which caused a lot of them a lot of anxiety. They went home on Friday in one uniform, they came back on Monday to another uniform. Now, although the business thought of themselves as a buildings maintenance company, effectively the executive oversaw a series of acquisitions, because every time they won a contract, they acquired a whole new workforce with its management and its processes and systems included. So we decided to focus on building a strong core to pull this fragmented company together. I used Barrett's framework as a guideline to develop the strategy. There's more about Barrett's framework further on in the months ahead, and you'll find the actual framework to download and use in month 1. I also just mentioned that I used integral theory, and I looked at the business through to build an integral map. Now, integral theory suggests that the world is built of something called holons. I'll tell you more about those during the months ahead. But holons are all made up of quadrants, levels, lines, states and types. Now I'm going to start with a brief explanation of these and how they applied to this company, but I'm going to start at the bottom with types and work my way up to the quadrants. Please be aware this explanation will be brief. This case study is simply an illustration of how I applied my knowledge in these areas and to get a greater understanding of these elements as the map requires through working through the months in the BestCompanyCulture.Club. So, types. This was a business was a maintenance of social housing and public buildings. It consisted of a lot of joint ventures with local housing associations and local councils. So the contracts were joint venture contracts. It inherited, therefore, a mix of IT systems, some from the housing associations, some from the local councils, some that it already had, and some that were imposed upon it from the parent company, which was in the construction world. The dominant culture was patriarchal, and there were inherent problems that the council had been unable to resolve in the contracts, which is one of the reasons why they had outsourced to the private sector. There had been rapid growth over the last 9 years in this company, It had been a startup 9 years ago, and it was now at 300 million turnover, so huge growth. And it had built up with a centralized structure of CEO, served in a hierarchical structure. Now, it was a complex business. Each region had a central structure and also had tradespeople and labourers and subcontractors. And as each contract came on board, it could bring as many as 500 or 600 new people and associated subcontractors. And many of them came with inherent terms and conditions as they two-peat across. If we look at the state, this business had grown organically from one London contract 9 years ago, and then it had added a Yorkshire contract, and it had formed a loose collection of contracts with a fragmented core providing direction and providing central services such as HR and IT. There was a definite north-south divide, now being united under the new CEO who had taken over and was trying to pull this north-south divide together and to make it a cohesive company. What he actually said to me was he wanted a culture whereby wherever you sliced this cake and whichever way you layered this cake, it would look the same. You would get the same service and you would know where to go to. But it was in constant flux because new contracts are effectively mergers, and every new contract brought in a different culture, different processes, different procedures, different core structure, different systems, and many would have a different focus. Some of those contracts were in a state of decline, some were in a state of stability, some were effectively startups. So it was incredibly complex in terms of state. Now, if we look at quadrants, levels, lines, states and types, the lines are lines of intelligence. It's been long accepted that there are multiple lines of intelligence and that intellectual quotient, IQ, is not the only line of intelligence, but just one indicator of intelligence, and that many other lines of intelligence exist and form pathways of learning. So emotional quotient or emotional intelligence has now been fairly well accepted in business, and spiritual intelligence, for instance, is becoming accepted in business. Now, integral theory states that all holons include lines of intelligence. That means that an organisation as a holon also has lines of intelligence. I'll be talking about holons later on, not in this particular presentation. Now, I split the organisational intelligence into 5 lines of intelligence: IT, business planning, communication, governance, and empowerment. This is certainly not exhaustive in terms of lines of intelligence, but for this particular organisation at this particular time, it worked extremely well. And I allocated 15 points, 5 in the low region of intelligence, 5 in the medium region of intelligence, and 5 in a high region of intelligence to each of those lines. We had a focus group, and the points were allocated to each of those lines by the focus group of where is the business in terms of its level of intelligence in these different lines. This particular case study revealed very, very low level of intelligence operating across the whole business. Now note, this is not that that intelligent people didn't work there, or that the people weren't behaving in as intelligent a way as possible. It's that the way the business was operated and was structured did not allow for the collective intelligence of the organisation to flourish. The IT was a mix and match of group IT. Remember, they were owned by a parent company. Local IT and inherited IT. The business planning was a 3-year plan which was written by 2 people, presented to the CEO, and then passed by the chairman of the group and then put back on the shelf for another year. There was no regional business planning, and there was certainly no cascading of business plans down through the organisation. Communication was fairly ad hoc. There were a few lines of communication set up, but no coordinated plan. Governance differed in each contract depending on what had been inherited from the contract that they had arisen from, and the local authority that they had risen from. And as for empowerment, all decisions went upwards and landed eventually on a senior executive's desk. So that slowed down processes dramatically. There was one instance where that I came across where the contract that people were working on was supposed to be finished within a fortnight, and they were basically redoing bathrooms in social housing across a whole part of one of the towns, and the shower heads had been failed to be delivered, so they needed to reorder from a new company shower heads, and the CEO of that particular area of the country, that regional CEO, was away on holiday, and only he could sign the requisition for the shower heads. So it had to wait for a fortnight till they could order the shower heads, by which time the whole contract had been pushed back and was now they were now not in time delivering of the contract, and therefore were penalised in terms of how much they earned for that particular contract, all because of the way that the governance was set up. Now, in terms of levels of development, I took this from Richard Barrett's work on building a values-driven organisation. And I got the executive team to rate both the business and themselves as a team. Now, this starts at survival level. You'll see there are similarities to Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. Starts at survival level, and survival is the pursuit of profit and shareholder value in this instance. Relationship is building relationships that support the organisation. Self-esteem is high-performance systems and processes. Transformation is continuous renewal and learning. Internal cohesion is development of a strong and cohesive culture. Remember, that's what I had actually been brought in to help them to do. So making a difference is defined as strategies and alliances and partnerships, and service is service to the community. The executive team rated the business as a whole at survival level, pursuit of profit and shareholder value, and rated themselves as a team at relationships that support the organisation, the relationship level. Now, if you recall, I'd been brought in to help them build and develop a strong and cohesive culture. So that was quite a way above where they were in terms of level of development. They had a long way to go. Looking at the quadrants, now in the next slide I'll show these quadrants in a little bit more detail, but effectively the quadrants look at the internal and the external, both subjective and objective, both singular and plural, and this translates to I and we on the internal, and it and its on the external. On the next slide, I've put it and its together as one line. Now, this comes from Fred Koffmans' interpretation of the quadrants as they relate to an organisation. And you can look at the presentation in month 1 of Koffmans' blocks and get a much greater explanation of this. But you can see that this actually looks at the organisation in terms of the platform that it runs on, the behaviours that it does, and the end result that it gets in terms of the I, we, it and its, or the quadrants. What we did with this was we started to look at the organisation and as the organisation. And what we found was that the organisation in the top right hand quadrant, the it, was very focused on the next contract and on doing what was urgent now. In the lower right hand quadrant, the its, we found that it had some understanding that the infrastructure was crumbling, and they'd started beginning to look at some aspects of how to deal with this. And the whole company operated mainly through the upper right hand quadrant in terms of what are we going to do now, and then looking at what's blocking us, what infrastructure is blocking us, came as a secondary thing really, and quite late in the game. There was absolutely no understanding in terms of the upper left hand quadrant of what were the values, what they stood for, and what made people in the organisation behave in particular ways. There was no understanding at all of that. They'd never focused on this. Some attempts had been made to create shared meaning with some of the stakeholders. So, for instance, some people had responded to tenant associations, and they had to work with unions. It was a very unionised business, and so they had to work with unions. So there was some attempt to try and create shared meaning with some of the stakeholders. Now, once we'd actually built the structure, this slide here looks at the second part of the Barrett framework in terms of implementing the structure. And I've dropped this in for you to have a look and see some of the things that move into an implementation phase. But we were a long way from this implementation phase. You can download this whole thing again from from month 1 here. And we started with a business symposium, a buildings maintenance business symposium, which we held over 2 days. We started with the executive team, the directors and the regional directors, so it was 10 people in all. And we did an appreciative inquiry initially. We looked at what is it that gives life to this business. Remember, this business had grown at a very, it had grown phenomenally over 9 years, from a small contract in London to being a fairly large business, well, a very large business with about 4,000 people working for it and a 300 million turnover. And it had done that in 9 years. So something was working really well here. So we wanted to discover what gives life to this business. And then, having done that, we started to work on envisioning what might make this business a really great place to work and be really working well. And then looking at how could that be co-constructed, and also, once we'd gone through that phase, empowering the team to build and sustain and adjust. Now, I've stated that as if that goes in an order. Actually, these things all intersect and interact. So whilst we vaguely follow around that order, it's a continuous cycle, and these things are more of a matrix than a flat circle. And you may well be envisioning what might be at the same time as empowering the team to build, sustain and adjust in a different area of the whole process. As well as that, as well as appreciative inquiry, we used brand dots to look at various different things. And we ran a workshop which looked at the core values. So what are the personal attributes we promote, and why should customers associate with us? The personality of the business. So if the business was to be described as a person, what would it be, and would I as a customer like you? We looked at the beliefs. What are our operating principles, and how collectively did we want to be seen internally and externally? And in terms of the customers or clients, that was, well, what can I expect? We looked at the benefits. What can we give? And if we give that, what's in it for me? What's in it for the customer? We looked at the credentials. What reasons do people have to trust us? And from the customer's perspective, why should I believe that? We looked at relationships. Who do we support and communicate with? And from the customer's perspective, who do you associate with? Why should I trust you? Links with who do you associate with? And we looked at image. If we were being described, how would I look? And from the customer's perspective, well, do I like the look of you then? The fundamentals were, what are the facts and our function, and who are you and what do you do? And we built collages of these, and we worked on them to really get an idea of what does this brand actually look like. And that took quite some time. Out of all of this work dropped the initial mission statement. Now this mission statement evolved over time, but initially the mission statement came out as improving people's lives by caring for the built environment. We wanted a mission statement. The initial mission statement was something like be the best in their sector or something like that. But we wanted something that really would speak to the electrician going into somebody's house to rewire it, or the site manager who was overseeing putting new windows into people's houses, improving people's lives by caring for the built environment. Now, if we go back to our quadrants, we looked at, so let's look at what change. And the what change comes into the right-hand quadrants, the it and the its. So in the it, we looked at what is the process, the steps and behaviours in this change that we want to make happen. And in the its, we looked at, well, what's the structure then? What's the structure of this change? On the other side, we looked at why change. We looked at what change and we looked at why change. And in the why change, in the plural, we looked at the we looked at what is the shared meaning, the mutual understanding, what are our shared beliefs and values, and that was shared as a team within the business, as a group of people working for this business, and as shared beliefs in terms of the contracts that we were working in, our shared beliefs with the customers that we were working with, the housing associations and the council as well. And the why change was, well, for me as an individual working in this business, what does this mean to me? What do I think? What do I feel? What do I value? Many businesses don't look at the why change, they look at the what change. And they fail to look at what's going to make people actually move towards this change that we want in the business. Out of that dropped 6 behaviour statements in the what change, and we started to look at the supporting structure for those behaviours so that we could start to make those changes happen. That was things, for instance, like we wanted people to be more efficient, but it was impossible for them to be more efficient with the IT structures that we had in place, which were very fragmented, didn't fit together, and inherited from all over the place. So one of the supporting structures was to work on the IT systems so that people could be more efficient. We looked at the drivers of those behaviours from a personal perspective, and we looked at the compelling reason to change, which was mutually understood by our business as a whole, the people as a whole, and also by the joint ventures that we were in. Now, this related to a strategy which I've put very simply here. This is the sort of high level. It unpacked quite a lot. And we split the strategy into 3 areas: the executive team, the management teams, and the workforce as a whole. And starting with the executive team, we had used the appreciative inquiry to get them to envision a better future. And we kept revisiting this appreciative inquiry at various times. We introduced a strategy of blueprints to the executive team because we wanted that to go through the whole workforce eventually. We started to implement GOSPA business planning to align each different region of the business with the whole business plan, and to effectively get the people to build the business plan in each region in alignment with the high-level business plan for the whole company. We will work GOSPA through in a subsequent month. We started to implement executive coaching and with a focus on getting the execs to walk the talk. In terms of the management teams, we needed some structure, some governance structure that allied to the roles and accountabilities and empowerment, and that enabled them to run more efficient meetings and get a better result from those meetings. And we started to introduce elements of holacracy. We didn't introduce holacracy completely, but we introduced elements of holacracy into this into the management structure in order that they were able to govern their meetings more. We also looked at a meta currency for cross-charging internally. One of the problems that they had was a very strong silo mentality, which came from each different contract that they'd come in. So if they'd come in from a Labour council or a Conservative council, they had very different ideas, for instance, about how things should be run. And there was a real strong silo mentality. So we started to break down that, initially financially, looking at a meta currency. We were also going to measure resilience, but we never got around to that in the time frame that I was working there. So looking at the workforce as a whole, we needed to develop the meaning behind the values that had been imposed by the group. When I first got there, I started to ask people about the values which had been imposed by group on this business. And nobody could even tell me what the values were. And there only were 5 values. So we started to look at it and say, what actually is the meaning behind these, and what does it mean to be following these values in this organisation? What would it take to make this company successful and following these values from each worker's perspective? And what we did was we started to implement blueprints, which I mentioned when I introduced it to the executive team. Now, blueprints is a way of working where you crowdsource from the whole organisation. What are those things that that we need to do in order to make us more successful and to be a great place to work? And what are those things that we need to stamp out or get rid of? So you can see, here's the results. The things that we needed to do more of were things like can-do attitude, clear goals and direction, right the way through to teamwork and collaboration. And the things we needed to do less of were things like damaging the brand, disrespect, inconsistency, wrong people for the job, unconducive working environment. And if we could put that together as a formula, the things that we need to do more of over the things that we need to do less of, and score it, then we had a formula for how we were going to improve, and we could score it on a regular basis and see whether we were improving or not, and what we were doing that was actually making that difference. But it's quite difficult to remember all of that. Remember, they couldn't even remember, most people couldn't even remember the 5 values that had been imposed by the group. So we started to build a right brain language using graphic symbols. Let me give you an example. How do you feel when you see the words backstabbing and politics versus this very graphic symbol? So, translating this into just a few of the values that you saw in that formula, in this particular company's blueprints formula. Wrong people for the job was one that we mentioned as a thing that we needed to do less of. This icon is quite graphic in that this company came from construction, so this is clearly wrong people for the job. But we also built with it a little dictionary of what did that actually mean when we unpacked it, and this was all in the workforce's own words. It was crowdsourced from the workforce, so things like square peg in round holes, carrying passengers, acceptable lack of contribution, substandard contractors, promoting people beyond their skills and experience, unqualified staff, unproductive people, dead wood. That was all the workforce's or the whole company's own words that they came up with, basically. Here's another one. Inconsistency. Chopping and changing, constant restructuring without any benefits, unnecessary changes, etc. Teamwork and collaboration was one of the things that we need to do more of. Building cohesive relationships, supporting each other, working as a collective. Remember, the company worked very much in silo mentality. And this, when we built this formula and these dictionaries, this was the first time that this company had ever worked as a whole team and collaborated and worked as a collective. Health, safety and environment focused was another one. Health and safety was extremely important, and here's the whole crowdsourced formula. So the things above the line are the things that we need to do more of. The things below the line are the things that we need to do less of. And that gives us our formula for success. So the strategy. We started with the executive team, if you recall. We worked on the management teams in terms of integral governance, and we worked on the workforce as a whole, and we started that with blueprints. Now, in terms of the management teams, much of what we looked at initially was how did they get to be more efficient in terms of their governance. And we used, as I say, we borrowed little bits of holacracy to start to get much more agile in our organisational governance and steering, though we didn't implement holacracy as a whole. You can look at a bit more of holacracy. I'll signpost you to some places on the internet where you can find holacracy, and I will touch on it through the next few months, but I won't be explaining it in great detail at that time. So that's my first case study, and we'll be unpacking much of these elements in greater detail as we move through the months. Bye for now.